Thank you for being here and spending your Saturday talking to me, right? Firstly, I'm super happy to meet this bunch of students. I always wondered who you guys were because I've been part of the Joy Thomas Foundation since the inception. So 3 years back, I was working in California in San Jose, and we were part of the initial group which actually kickstarted the foundation. The group of like 4 people who came together. And I was part of the initial group. And the way I got in touch with the Joy Thomas Foundation was that I wanted to give back to the Pan IIT community in the Bay Area. I was talking to a bunch of people, so just got involved in a couple of these efforts. I got pulled in, and I've been running a bunch of programs. So, in addition to the scholarship program, Joy Thomas program, also Joy Thomas Foundation, we also run a mentorship program across the third gen IITs. So I've been actually in charge of putting up the program in place. And I've been in touch with the placement officers across all the second generation and third generation IITs. And we have been looking at a way to upskill students and make them employable in the marketplace. So this is something we are really interested in. We are doing a trial version of some of the stuff with the third gen IITs, but then once we finalize the way forward, we want to extend this across IITs. So I see that there are a bunch of students of IIT Madras. So I've been in touch with the CDC professor of IIT Madras, and one of the conversations we've had is how do you upskill students? Even at IIT Madras, there are huge problems which need to be solved. So that's a quick brief about some of the work I'm doing. So can I maybe get a good feel of the students who are present here? So in the message in your chat box, can you just message me quickly in terms of have you done an internship so far? And if you have done an internship, can you message me which companies you have interned in? If you're not interned anywhere, you don't need to put that in the chat box. Okay, so just put it in the chat box as to have you interned so far? And if yes, then maybe which company. Meanwhile, I'll pull up my presentation to get ready for sharing that with you. Hey guys, nobody done any internship so far? Not a single person? So I'm looking at the chat box, there's probably nothing out there.
Okay. Five of them have done their internships, Mr. Vinod.
Okay, yeah. I see one.
Yeah, Deepak is one. Himanshi, please.
Yes, sir. I'm writing.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, folks, I'll look at the comments. So again, it looks like a couple of these internships are facilitated by the Joy Thomas Foundation. So that's good. What I'm going to talk about today is going to be interesting for students. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to be here, because all of you are probably in your third year. You're just beginning your third year. And there has been a lot of work done around this concept of preparing for jobs and internships. And when I talk to students, whether it be the first generation IITs, whether it be IIT Madras, whether it be IIT Kharagpur, and so on, I think the most common thought which a student has is that the placement officer will help me find a job, right? This is really where they're coming from. And through maybe for the next 20 minutes, maybe next 25 minutes, I want to talk about how the world of recruiting is very, very different from the world of academic studies. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about how do you prepare for interviews, and this information you're going to gain today will help you not just for your internship search and for your job search, but I think we'll also learn the basics of how interviews work. So this will help you even when you're looking for your 5th job in the workplace, your 10th job, maybe 15 years later, 20 years later, you should remember what I'm telling you, okay? So I think the biggest takeaway from this is we're going to learn a bunch of new topics you've never heard of, and the world of recruiting and HR works very differently in ways you are never aware of. So we'll touch on a bunch of these things. Okay. So anyway, you know that I'm running a website called careerbolt.app. I'm doing it with a bunch of IIT students who are helping us create this website. I'm also working as adjunct professor at IIT Palakkad, and one of the things I do is work with the Career Development Center of different institutions. I have a YouTube channel called Career Bolt. I strongly recommend that you guys check it out. So we have a couple of conversations with a lot of placement officers from IITs, from NITs, students from different colleges. We've put up a lot of stuff out there. I think it's really helpful. Based on some of the comments I've got, I think students are benefiting from it. So do check it up if you get some chance. There's also a community called Tech Career Bolt on LinkedIn. So join that community and you can always ask me questions even there. So today I'm going to cover a bunch of these topics. What are the different types of interviews you can expect? point number one. We'll also talk about the STAR framework. And I think maybe a couple of you guys understand what I'm talking about the STAR framework, but if not, this is probably the biggest takeaway from today's conversation. What is STAR and how do you guys prepare for the STAR type of interviews? We'll talk about building confidence, answering tough questions, and how you can talk about your strengths in the interview process, and a bunch of other topics. I will leave maybe 20 minutes to half an hour for questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask me, follow up, and so on. And even if you guys have comments about the Joy Thomas Foundation, how it's working, or how you would like it to work better or closely with you, feel free to share the data with me. I'll be happy to take it back to the Joy Thomas Foundation. Let's maybe jump into the different types of interviews. So I've been working in the space of interviewing students for close to 15 years. And I have been an interviewer at companies like Samsung. So when Samsung Electronics came to, I used to work in Korea in their headquarters. And I organized the first recruiting drive for Samsung across Indian universities. So we went to different IITs. I had a chance to come to IIT Kharagpur, Delhi, and so on. So I have a pretty good sense of what the different types of interviews are. And we'll talk about what these are and how you can prepare for it. Okay. So first of all, the most important type of interviews are behavioral interviews. It's also called STAR interviews. And most of these questions talk about what have you done in your past in the last 3-4 years to get ready and build the job skills as required by the company. So that's the purpose of behavioral interviews. You will also sometimes face something called a panel interview, where there's a panel of judges who talk to each student. It's very uncommon. It doesn't happen that way nowadays. Nowadays, it's pretty much one-to-one interviews. There's also group interviews or group discussions where there's one interviewer and many students talking to the one interviewer. Again, it's not very common. If you're trying for finance jobs or consulting jobs, you will face something called a case interview. And a case interview always follows a format of they'll give you a situation to talk about like how do you break down the problem, how do you analyze that question and come up with some answers. Sometimes they'll ask you to prepare a PowerPoint presentation and get back to them, make a presentation. So they not only judge your case skills, but also look at your communication skills. In other cases, they'll ask you tricky problems and see how you approach that specific question. For example, in Google, one of the questions which used to be asked in the past was, how many golf balls can fit into a Boeing 747? So this is an actual question asked in a Google software engineering interview. And the purpose behind this is not to check the exact number of golf balls which can fit into a Boeing 747, but it's about how do you break down the problem into smaller modules? How do you break down the modules and come up with some ways of answering each one of those questions? So it's about how do you break down problems and look at it. So problem solving is a big component of what they try to understand through these sort of interviews. It is very common, as I said, for finance and consulting jobs. Technical interviews are something you will face as a computer science student or if you're trying for, say, computer science jobs or data analytics jobs, you will definitely find that you will have a strong technical interview, and we'll talk about what that means. And sometimes you may also face a stress interview. Some finance jobs and consulting companies also introduce something called stress interviews where they ask you very tricky questions. They're meant to make you feel uncomfortable. There's a purpose behind it. One of the strongest reasons is that many of these companies expect you to work very hard and work in a high pressure environment. And it's not for everyone. Not every student can survive that environment. So if you can survive a stress interview, that means that yes, maybe you can work in that sort of workplaces. For example, when people think about investment banking, if people are thinking about finance jobs, sometimes they can tend to be high pressure jobs. And if you're working for a company like Goldman Sachs, you're working for a company like JP Morgan Chase, their recruiters say openly that we need people who can survive in high pressure environments, right? So that's one of the reasons why they do stress interviews. But outside finance jobs or maybe some consulting jobs, do not see it elsewhere. So most of you will face technical interviews and behavioral interviews. Behavioral interviews also called as STAR interviews or HR interviews. So this is a good sense of where most of you are going to end up once you finish your 4th year. You're going to end up in jobs either in computer science or data analytics. I think around 60 to 70% of students in IITs tend to go for these jobs. And I think that's the same trend even in NITs and some of the other colleges, that most jobs are in computer science and data analytics. And that's really where the high paying jobs are. In addition, you have jobs in consulting and finance, and then you have the traditional engineering jobs, core jobs. So if you're looking at computer science or in data analytics, your technical interview is going to be extremely important. your HR interview, not so important. So if you mess up your HR interview, you may still end up getting a job. It's not that critical, but your technical interview has to be done really well. On the other hand, when you're looking at, say, a consulting job or a finance jobs, you're not expected to have much of technical skills. In the sense, like they'll ask you some basic questions of do you understand cases, do you understand how to break down problems? But many of these companies have in-house training programs. For example, McKinsey, as an example, has I think it's a month-long program or 3-month-long program where they will actually teach you the basics of an MBA program during those 3 months. They'll teach you in and out of a business school during 3 months of intense studies. And the idea behind these programs is that a lot of the business skills required to do well in a workplace can actually be taught. This is something you can learn after joining the job. But what you cannot learn are the skills around teamwork, communication, and how do you answer questions which link to your people skills and communication skills. So the STAR interviews are a great way to understand how good your business skills are, how good your people skills are. And those are the skills which cannot be taught. So for consulting and finance, you should be a people person. You should be an extrovert as much as possible. You should be a person who is very comfortable looking at data. And all these are the questions you will face in HR interviews and STAR interviews. Again, going back to what I said earlier, HR interviews, STAR interviews, behavioral interviews, they all refer to the same thing. So for consulting finance jobs, STAR interviews are very important. For a lot of the core engineering jobs, R&D jobs, your technical interview is important, but at the same time, your HR interview will also happen, and that will also be an important criteria to select you. So both technical interviews and HR interviews matter for core jobs. I see that there are some students of mechanical engineering here, civil engineering here. If you're trying for a core job, you'll have to understand what is a STAR interviews, and that's something we'll dig into. There is some next couple of slides. Has anyone heard of what is a STAR interview? Before I jump there, can anyone tell me what is a STAR interview? Can anyone maybe unmute yourself and tell me what is STAR interviews if you heard of it? If you're not heard of it, that's fine. We'll talk about it subsequently. Folks, anyone heard of STAR interviews and what that means? It's almost like a quiz. Yeah. I'm not seeing anything from any response from students, and it's understandable, right? You're pretty early in terms of your internship search. Remember this, guys, even 20 years later, you'll be facing STAR interviews. So please remember what this means. It means situation, task, actions, results. It's meant to measure your skills and competencies required for the job. It's a way to ask a common question. So all interviewers are going to ask you the same question and listen to your STAR answer. And they'll evaluate your answers using a certain rubric. And they'll also show you what the rubric looks like. So those are STAR interviews. And to dig deeper, let's look at what are STAR interviews in terms of when you give an answer to any question using the STAR framework, you always have to begin with the situation, or talk about the task given to you, also discuss the actions you took to resolve the problem, and what is the impact of your actions. So these really are the 4 components of STAR. So let me use a STAR example on what I am doing right now, right? I'm sitting in front of you folks and giving you guidance. So let me apply the STAR framework to myself and talk about my experience using the STAR framework. Okay. So let me talk about the situation. So the situation is basically what brings me here, what makes you sit in front of you students. Likewise, you are going to be sitting in front of the interviewer and be telling the interviewer the reason why you are in front of the interviewer in the first place. So in my case, I was talking to the FFE Foundation, and we are having a conversation with Rajeshwari and team, and they basically mentioned that there are a bunch of scholars who are interested in getting upskilled, understanding what's required in the workplace to help find the best internships and best jobs. So that was the situation I entered in. The task given to me is it possible for me to come up with some sort of training program for the students? And I basically focused on 2 separate topics. One is the interviewing skills, the other one is the resume building skills. The action is what are the topics I covered in my conversations. It's probably 7 topics I covered under the the interviewing section, and maybe 4 topics I cover under the resume building section. And we did an FAQ, we did a Q&A. We're going to talk about all the things I did in my conversation with you. And we'll also talk about a result, which is that how do you measure the impact of your actions? So this is a metric I should use to say whether I did a good job or a bad job. And that can be, for example, maybe a satisfaction survey which you sent to your students and you gave me a rating of 3 out of 5 in terms of the impact I created, right? So these are ways to measure impact. So going back to the typical model of STAR questions, typically STAR questions always begin with, give me an example of a time in the past when you had to work with a large team of people, okay? Give me an example of a time in the past when you had to work with a difficult manager. Give me an example of a time in the past when you had to influence a group of people. Give me an example of the time in the past when you faced a difficult problem and how did you solve it? Give me an example of a time in the past when you had to lead a team. So these are all classic questions we get in the interview process. So these are the STAR questions. And whenever you answer these questions, you always have to frame it in a way of saying that what was the situation. And when you're talking about situation, it can be any situation, right? Whether if you've done an internship, a work internship, if you've worked on a project under a professor, if you've worked on some sort of uh, a study project along with your team members, been involved in a position of responsibility in your college. It can be, for example, you're a cultural secretary head, or maybe you're acting as a mess secretary. There are all these experiences you have, right? And say, for example, let's pick up this example of you being a mess secretary and taking care of the mess in your college. You can talk about like what was the situation before you became a mess secretary, right? So that's the situation which was happening before you stepped in. The task is, what are the tasks given to you by your immediate manager or your professor? The professor maybe gave you some tasks of improving the food quality in the mess. Maybe they wanted you to come up with a way to identify the problems being faced by the students. They also wanted you to be a liaison between the people working inside the mess and the students outside. So these are the tasks given to you. Action is, what did you do? What did you do as a mess secretary? For example, did you do some daily satisfaction survey to measure what was happening in the mess? Did you talk to the people working in the mess and come up with tables around what was going to be created for the menu? And did you display that to the students? And did you maybe collect feedback from students around what is some of the food they want in the mess? So these are the actions you did in your day-to-day job. And the final part is going to be the results, which is about, were you a good mess secretary or a bad mess secretary? And the answer cannot be that I think I was a good mess secretary, right? That's not a good answer. You have to give independent data points to say why you think you did a good job. It can be, for example, the amount of feedback you got from students. Maybe a lot of students walked up to you saying, hey, the food being served has improved dramatically. Maybe you did a satisfaction survey and you got good feedback. Maybe the people working in the mess wrote you a letter saying that they had a very good experience working with you. So all these examples of people telling you something comprises the results. Okay, so these are the 4 components of the STAR interview process. So interestingly, this is one feedback I got from an IIT Madras student when I was doing a workshop with IIT Madras 2 years back. So maybe I'll give you guys a minute, just go through this and just try to understand what I'm talking about and ask me questions if you have any. But I'll maybe give you a minute to just read through this in a bit of detail. So by the way, the 4th estate is one of the college newspapers at IIT Madras. So I'll give you guys a minute, just go through this, to give you a sense of what situation, task, actions, and results mean, especially when you're talking about something you've done within your college. Okay, folks, I think you probably had enough time to read this. I'll tell you what stands out as a recruiter when I look at this answer. What stands out to me is that, firstly, it's a short and sweet answer, right? The person is not rambling forever. So it's probably an answer which can be given easily within 2 to 3 minutes. And I think that's the ideal way to give a STAR answer. The second thing I like about this answer is that it talks about a bunch of things, like it talks about the metrics. in the way the person is going to be measured. So when you talk about the task, this person is saying that there's a number linked to how this person is going to be measured. Likewise, when you look at the results, I can also see the metrics in terms of the number of advertisers, talks about the percentage of change compared to the previous year. And when you read all these things, the number one thought which comes to your mind is that this is not the way anybody talks to your friends or anybody else. So the language of interviews is very different from regular conversations. What that also means is that if you really want to give a good star answer during the interview process, you have to rehearse for it and you have to practice for it. Okay, so the more you practice, the better your answers are going to look like. So I think that's probably the biggest takeaway when you look at preparing for s.t.a.r. interviews and being ready with the answers yourselves. Any questions from anyone about these slides or anything I've mentioned so far? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask me questions, okay? Okay, I'm not hearing any questions, so I'll move on and field the Q&A at the end of the conversation. Okay, so I'm now going to give you some very important tips, and I think they're very helpful to you as you begin your internship search and later on when you do your job search. Okay, the most important thing you can do to get ready for jobs is that identifying the job skills in the job description. So whenever you're applying for any job in any company, remember that you'll have to look at what is the job description for that job. For example, let's pick up an example here, right? Like, for example, Deepak Sai here is trying for a job in, say, Tata Motors. And Deepak wants to work as a production engineer at Tata Motors, right? And Tata Motors has come for the internship season and is trying to recruit people. So what Deepak should be doing is he should go to the career section of Tata Motors, go to their website, go to the career section, and under the career section, there'll always be a place to search for jobs. So Deepak types production engineer in the search button and then looks for all the job descriptions of production engineers. And you will see a bunch of job descriptions which turn up. So you download the suitable job description and look at it in detail and ask yourself, where are the skills? Hold on, let me see if there's a comments here. Yeah.
Mr. Vinod, that was me because
I see it.
I somehow feel they're very quiet today. They're usually not like this. Yeah. So I'm sure they'll ask you questions a bit later. Sorry.
Definitely. Yeah, I think it's a complex topic. Maybe they're just trying to understand, like, what am I trying to talk to them? So makes sense.
Okay. Okay.
So let's again go back to the example of Deepak, right? Saying that Deepak wants to try for Tata Motors. He goes to the career section of Tata Motors website, searches for production engineer in the career section, sees a couple of job descriptions, downloads the job descriptions. Under each job description, there's always a section called skills. And go to the skills section and ask yourself, do I have those skills as required by the company? And that can be a mix of technical skills, business skills, and people skills. And you have to ask yourself, do you have those skills? Because if you don't have those skills, maybe you're not the right fit for the job. And if you do not have the skills, the question is then how will you convince the recruiter that you have those skills? So if you can do this work, one of your legs is already across the threshold, right? You're already inside the company because you've already done a much better job than all your friends. So first thing I would say, even when you're doing an undergrad program, MS program, MBA program, the same rules apply that you have to download the job description, whichever company you're interested in, right? It can be McKinsey, it can be Boston Consulting Group, it can be Goldman Sachs, it can be Tata Motors, whatever, right? Identify the job descriptions. And I'll also share a database of s.t.a.r. questions with you. As soon as the session gets over, Rajeshwari is going to send you this database. So look at this s.t.a.r. database of questions and identify what is the link between the questions in the database and the skills as defined in the job description. And ask yourself, if I'm asked this question in the interview process, how will I answer that question? What sort of examples am I going to tell the interviewer? Create a list of these answers, write it down on a piece of paper, and then practice these answers. And that's really the way you get through a s.t.a.r. interview process, is that doing the homework and doing a lot of practice. Now, I'll spend more time talking about this in terms of what this means. Any questions? Let me again pause here. Is it making sense? I'm talking a lot of complex topics with you. Maybe you never heard of s.t.a.r, and I'm taking you into a deep dive of what's the s.t.a.r process is. Any thoughts or any questions as you listen to me talk? Has anyone faced s.t.a.r interview so far? Does this resonate with you?
Scholars, those who have finished your internships, I think can talk. Himanshi, Shrelikita, Arun, Deepak, and Rohini.
Um, yes.
Yeah.
Actually, in my interview, there was not the kind of situation question. The question was quite technical and related to my coursework. So I haven't faced the kind of interview, but many of my friends who have faced the interview in finance and consulting job, even they went to HR round, they faced the kind of questions
Okay.
they told me after the interview.
And what sort of internship did you do? Which field was it? Was it computer science and data analytics?
Yeah, data management.
Okay, got it.
Uh,
Remember the slide I showed you, that data management, actually, they don't really care too much about, they don't really care about HR interviews. They only care more about subject knowledge and your coding experience. So yeah, I think you fit into this bucket.
Yeah, yeah.
Anybody else wants to share some feedback?
Dikshant Bansal has found an internship on his own.
Okay.
So I think he can share his experience. Dikshant?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Basically, in my interview, they were more focused on the technical part. Actually, I
Okay.
got an internship in the Texas Instrument in the
Okay.
digital profile.
Okay.
So they asked me to give a basic, um, mm, tell about myself, and then they basically started to ask technical questions, and then finally the interview ended in around in around an hour.
Dikshan, did you face HR interview or s.t.a.r questions?
No, sir.
Oh, you did not. Okay, interesting.
Sir, actually, there was like there may happen some HR interview in the second round, but after that they canceled that HR round, and on the basis of the round one, they selected the students.
Wow, I guess they found some impressive students. So that's very interesting.
Yes.
So I tell you my experience with Samsung Electronics, right? We used to give a very good package. We used to say it was $150,000, and this was in 2011, 2012. And the way it used to happen is Samsung used to recruit on the basis of your GPA, CGPA, and we just to be 9 plus, and we used to go to like top three, top four IITs. I think we went to Madras, Delhi, Bombay. That was it. We didn't go elsewhere. And we also looked for the JE rank, right? They had to be like as high rank as possible. And we basically had two rounds of interviews at Samsung Electronics for the career roles, which was firstly the fact that you had to be very good in coding, and we had some bunch of experts and vice presidents from Samsung coming and talking to students, and everybody closed with the HR interview. So HR interview was not very important, but it was also a way for HR to understand, are you guys really interested in working in Korea? Are you interested in working in Samsung? So we're trying to understand the reasons why the persons were interested in the company. And if you had some red flags, like for example, if you thought that the student may not join Samsung, may go for her further studies, then HR could step in and say, okay, maybe we should give this person an offer. So this is how we used to manage the process at Samsung Electronics. But but I get a good sense that maybe some of you have done these interviews and understand how this works. Okay, so I'm gonna share a database of s.t.a.r questions with you, and like I said, it is always gonna follow the same format of give me an example of a time in the past when you had to show so and so skill, and that skill typically comes from the job description. So by looking at the job description in the company career website, you can do two things. One is that you can use the skills as defined in the job description on your resume, and that's the easy way for you to get shortlisted by the recruiters. So use the same words in the way it is described in the job description, put that on your resume, and there's a very high chance that you will get selected for the resume screening process. The second way it will help you is you can actually look at the job description, identify skills, and then begin to prepare s.t.a.r questions based on those skills. And there's a high chance, there's a 90% chance that, so I was saying that the second advantage of looking at these skills is that you can then go back and create questions. So those are the same HR questions, the STAR questions you'll face in interview process. And by actually looking at the skills in advance, you can even predict what questions will come at you in the interview process. And if you can predict the questions, you can actually prepare the answers in advance. And the answers you give will be much better than everyone else, right? So that's the way you get selected. So for example, I'll give you a good reason why you guys should prepare a lot. I heard that in IIT Roorkee this year, American Express came for the recruiting process. 800 students applied to American Express, and they ended up selecting one student. So what does that mean is that the recruiters can be as selective as they want to be. So you have to do everything possible within your power to practice for interviews well in advance. And the most practiced person, the person who's the most well prepared, stands the highest chance of getting these jobs.